Good morning, everyone. My name is Connor Moran. I am the director of the Wisconsin Book Festival. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for Jennifer Palmieri's She Proclaims. These are the events that make the Wisconsin Book Festival so special. Jennifer, thank you for joining us. We are also joined today by Shannon Henry Kleiber from Wisconsin Public Radio. Shannon, thank you so much for being here as well and moderating this conversation today. As always, I want to thank the Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation for their ongoing support of free cultural events through the Wisconsin Book Festival. It is one of the great pleasures of this year for me that we are able to do these events virtually and bring us all together, even if we can't be all together. But we also have really expanded. There are many people here from Madison, many people from Wisconsin, but we have people from across the nation and across the globe. So that is one small, wonderful thing that has occurred because of the pandemic. So we are grateful for everyone who's here today. Most notably, we're grateful that Jennifer Palmieri is here to talk about her book. And I will turn the proceedings over to Jennifer and Shannon, and I will see you at the end. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Connor. This is so much fun. Thanks, Jennifer, for joining us today. And yeah, it is fun to be able to be in these different places. And I'm in Madison, as is Connor. Are you in New York? Or are you?
I'm at my husband's family's house in West Milford, New Jersey.
Ah,
Yeah, it's neat. There's like you can't quite. Well, my poster is covering it, but it is a beautiful. I know it's not as nice as Wisconsin, but we do back up to a beautiful state forest, so it's nice here.
well, I am really happy to be talking with you today. I loved your book, and I was reading it thinking, I just relate to so much of it. I feel like I'm hearing this from a friend. I'm talking to a friend, and it's so painfully honest. I mean, you have it in the background too, but She Proclaims is Jennifer's book. So the thing that it really hit me hard is how women always dive after every ball. And I just kept thinking about that. And I kept thinking about that as kind of this driving force of so much of what you write about. And why do we do that? And should we be doing that?
I think we do that because we think that we're not quite sure if we fit in the workplace. We're not quite sure that we belong there. I think it's the same doubt that makes us think that we're in competition with other women for a limited amount of success, right? So, when I first started working, which was in 1988, that was my first job out of when I graduated from college. I worked in a congressional office, and it was Leon Panetta actually who ended up going on to be Secretary of Defense for Obama, and I was like really lucky to have this great boss. And so I felt like I learned about politics from the men and the women both, but I definitely looked to the women to see how am I supposed to be in the workplace. And I found that the women did their jobs as they were assigned, but then they also did everything that needed to happen in order for the institution to run, and whether that was their job or not. And the men seemed to be satisfied, like leaving at the end of the day with, well, operations are still going on, but the women would, I think we had the sense like, well, if I leave, I'm going to be the first asked to go, right? I think that we have a sense that we're not quite established there, and and what I realized was I ended up taking a lot of value from being the person who dove for every ball. I liked hearing from my colleagues, oh, we couldn't possibly do it without Jennifer, and she's always so reliable. And I was proud of that. But what I came to realize was I was taking too much value from that and not enough value from things like, I don't know, pay, salary, where how we show that we actually value women. And it's a simple thing, but sort of the overall premise of the book is that we just don't, in all ways in the world, and how we show that we value men over women, and that when we'll have real equality is when we stop doing that, is when we, in ways that it's built into the marketplace, as well as what we hear, how we still, women, not just men, but men and women both hear men's voices more clearly than they hear women. It's like all these ways that we show that we value women over
Do you
men. And
feel
the
like how
desire
do you
for a
feel like
ball
you've
is that.
gotten better at that? How do you feel like you've improved on that? And something
Yeah.
that you write about is we're similar ages, and I wrote for the Washington Post for many years, and I wrote about technology for the business section. And I always felt like I was often the woman in the room, and
Totally.
but had to do more as the woman in the room. And so I kept thinking back to that. So a little bit older now, I feel like I can say no to things a little
Right.
more. You feel like that helps? Maybe the
I do feel like that helps. I feel like I can say no to more things, but I don't also want myself or you or any women to leave behind the good skills that we've developed, right?
Mhm.
So there may have been things that we have done to fit into a man's world that meant we were working harder than men, but it doesn't mean that you have to, the answer isn't act like them, right? The
Right.
answer isn't just act like men. I don't want to do that, and the world would be pretty uninteresting if we did. So I think, it's just like I want to be more conscious of it to make sure I'm diving for every ball and therefore I'm compensated for it. Or I stay up, I work later on a piece of writing than others may do, other men may do, but I just want it to be that good. So it's about being conscious uh, of why you're doing what you're doing and making sure that you're getting something in return for it. But the I want women to read this book, and the whole thing the whole time I'm writing, and what I have in my head is like, you've got this, like you've got it, you've got this. There's nothing left to prove. You don't have some other hurdle you have to go through. You don't need you don't need to have like amp up your resume one more time. Like, you are fine as is, and the things that are holding you back are a lot of what you've internalized. Let me explain to you why you've internalized those things. There's a good reason for it, but now you need to shed them.
Mhm.
And that is, that's like, I hope it gives women tools to do that.
You mentioned pay, which I think is really important. Do you have any advice about asking for a raise or asking for more money? I mean, this is one of the hardest things I think so many of us do.
Yeah, and I've read a lot of interesting studies about it. Like Lean In did a study, this was a number of years ago, that found if a woman went in and said, I deserve a raise, and I want it because I'm worth it, she got the raise once, but then she never got promoted again.
Mm.
And then the women who came in and said, I need a raise because it is demoralizing to my staff, to that I am not paid as much as the male colleagues, and it's hurting our ability to be productive because people on my staff don't feel badly about it. Then the woman got the raise and continued to get promoted in the company.
Mhm.
So that, I am not saying that is what we should do. That is definitely not what we should do. But it just shows you how, and this is something I learned in politics, with in the Clinton campaign. We were told that Hillary's ambition to be president had to be expressed in wanting to be in service to others. That we still expect women to be selfless and maternal. So your raise has to be because it's going to help somebody else. And I think that now you just have to, what I've realized is, even if it is a little bit uncomfortable, even if you do get a little bit of blowback, we just have to be forthright in asking for what we deserve. And if you get blowback, well, it's better than this. And I also think about, it's better than the status quo. We can't, I mean, sort of the realization I had, because when I started working, I thought the women's rights movement was done, right? Did you think that, Shannon? Like, I thought that was something that happened in the 60s and we're good, and maybe I'll have to work a little harder than the guys, but
It would
eventually
keep
women,
getting better. It would keep getting better.
yeah,
Yes.
just they can keep getting better. And in my own career, I mean, I've had a great career. It's not like I feel like men have tried to help me back. Definitely not. They still rose way faster than I did, right? I was deputy White House communications director, and the guy I worked for was 10 years older than me. It was not the first time I worked for somebody who was 10 years older than me. He does not think he's 10 years better than me. He doesn't think that.
Mhm.
It's just the system. He rose faster. And it's like understanding that you're operating within a system that has devalued women. That is why, this is why the women's soccer team has to sue to get paid what they're worth, is because we built a system to value, and you have to get out from under the system. And if we get a little bit of blowback compared to what other women have had to fight to get us to this point, whatever, that's our role. That, we got to, move forward, draw fire. That is what happens to women that move forward. But it is better than sitting still.
So how you mentioned making change from the inside out, which I think is a great way to think about it. How can we make change now? And I'll also just mention, I was just reading some statistics about how many women are leaving the workforce right now in the pandemic, and it's stunning. You've probably seen some of the same
Yeah.
statistics. How can we make change when women and working parents are leaving the workforce, and we need to not just make things a little bit better, we need to kind of pivot entirely
Yeah.
through this pandemic.
And I think it is a pivotal moment, right, for women right now, because women are in the pandemic, women are has suffered the highest number of layoffs, are also most likely to be in an essential profession that is underpaid, right? Because this is, I'm talking about teachers, healthcare workers, um, and bear the burden at home. And so all of those things have combined to, and some of my friends to say, it's not worth it anymore. I can't do this. I'm not going to go back to work. So this is a pivotal moment. Either that means women will band together, inside an individual workplace and collectively outside in the world to say, this is just proving how broken all of these systems are, that we don't have childcare that is that's provided, that this is not a service and it's not affordable, there's not a way we can do it, that we don't pay teachers and home care workers and childcare workers enough. Like what these things reveal is women are not valued, that they were expected to do this kind of work that makes the world run for lesser than we pay men to do the things that they've traditionally done in the world. So, but it's not, I'm not saying this lightly, like as if this is assured. This is a pivotal moment. Either we will do that, and I believe that women just have that fire in us that we are going to fight for that. Or women could really suffer a generation long setback in terms of having power in the workplace and not having the option of working outside the home.
So how can we turn that in the right direction? And is some of that helping each other?
Well, certainly. The premise of the book in 2 words is support women.
Yeah.
Because when you believe yourself to be in competition with other women, as I said, you were saying you don't actually belong in the workforce. You were saying that this is a place for men and women have to fight each other. And I think believing that, as so many of us have sort of internalized, I believe that is what really keeps a cap on things, because if you believe that, it sort of affects how you engage in the workplace. You are not a good advocate for yourself, because 10 times a day you're being sent signals that tell you men are more valuable than you. From like the music we hear on the radio to every time you see a television show, credits go up. Who's the writer? Who's the director? Who's the executive producer? The athletes and what they're paid, just all these ways that we just absorb constantly. You think about that and it's like, well, no wonder we have a hard time asking for a raise. No wonder we have a hard time advocating for, in our own families that the burden be shared, more evenly between men and women. But it is like, I want, read all that, understand that, know where it comes from, and then go fight for it. It is, we all agree. I don't feel, and it's really important to understand that I don't feel like men try to hold women back. I don't think that's what's happening. We all agree that women should have the same opportunities as men, but now we got to get into the nitty gritty to dismantle these systems that have been built that create all of these obstacles that exist in real life, like the ones that working women are finding now.
Who have been some of your mentors in the years past, and what have you learned in kind of bringing that forward?
Valerie Jarrett is a really important mentor of mine. This is an advisor to President Obama. I met her relatively late in my professional development. I was 45 when I came to the White House. And I'd always wanted to support other women, right? So I made a point of trying to hire women, trying to hire, and particularly women of color, because I work in democratic politics, and they don't always walk the walk when it comes to being good advocates for people of color in your actual workplace. Um, and but I wasn't one of those women that like went to like every Wednesday night, all the girls get together and have a little power session. I was never one of the women that did that, because I thought that if you had to lean on other women for support, it meant you couldn't hack it in the man's world, right? And then I met Valerie, who has a very different view, and watched her operate, listened to her, was the beneficiary of a lot of support that she gave me, a lot of backing that she gave me, boost she gave me when there was no reason for her to do it. And I realized, you know what? I can't hack it in a man's world without a woman's help. And there's nothing, and not only is there nothing wrong with that, there's something really empowering about that. And that what I have found in the last few worlds where I've sort of been years where I sort of embraced this notion that women do need to band together, so we're at least not in competition with each other, but then also supporting each other, because it is harder. And I found that if I could give my younger self one piece of advice, it would be, women are not your competition, they are your support system. And when you treat them as such, it rebounds in you in all of these ways. So she, in particular, is in terms of female mentors, really important. Another woman who I write about in the book a little bit and dedicate, she's one of the women I dedicate the book to, is named Evelyn Lieberman, who was a deputy chief of staff for President Clinton, the Clinton White House. She would tell, the one sentence she said to me is, people take their cue from you. If you act like you belong in the room, people will treat you as such. If you act like your word matters, people will treat you as such. And I find that, it's harder for women. I know that's harder for people of color, but I really find that to be true.
That's really interesting. And it's the title of your podcast, I think, is something that's to bring up too. And tell us a little bit about that. It has to do with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. The podcast is called Just Something About Her. During the Clinton campaign, we did a lot of, research and focus groups about why people didn't like Hillary. And what we would hear over and over again in real life and in research was, there's just something about her I don't like. TSAHIJDL. There's just something about her I don't trust. And they could not be specific about it. It was just this thing. And I think that that's sort of like, that's where we are now, right? We're like we're in an intangible, unconscious gender bias territory. And in the case of Hillary, what I think happened is that she was somebody for the course of 40 years was always stepping outside of the role that women had traditionally played, from when she was a very young woman in college to when she was like a lawyer, while didn't change her name when her husband was the governor of Arkansas, to the first lady that worked on policy, to the first lady to run for the Senate, And it's not that any of it was so radical in real time, but it was a little, we don't recognize it. I didn't appreciate before I worked for Hillary how important models are in our heads of what leaders look like. And there's something vexing about her. There's something confounding. We don't quite get it. There's something about her I just don't like.
It reminds me, in race, we often get criticized if we sound too feminine or vocal fry, or it's people will even say, listeners will say, I can't quite tell you what I don't like about that woman's voice, but I don't like it.
I don't like it, right? It's just, and it is, and we would get this advice, Shannon, in the campaign, on Hillary's campaign, we get this advice where people would, people from Hollywood, like big directors and stuff, would send us memos to say, she needs to be strong, but we have to see a vulnerable side. And, she has to have a commanding presence, but, we need to see something a little softer. And I was like, like, these people are really smart. I should take all this advice in. And then finally, I was like, this makes no sense. this makes no sense. And Hillary said, it was so good. She said, tell them, wow, this is really helpful. Thank you. This is so helpful. But what would be really useful would be if you could point to a woman on the world stage that did it just right. And then that would give Hillary something that she could model herself after. And of course, no one ever had an answer as to who
Right.
that was. And you're like, okay, fine. This is just people getting used to change. And if it's what we have to go through, it's annoying, but whatever. That's what we have to go through.
And so the podcast, you're interviewing women, right?
Yeah.
And is there
I'm gonna
a
interview men too, but right now it's all
so far so
episodes.
that's
Yeah.
okay, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone can tune into that too. And it's
Yeah, and it's just to try to like understand with each of these women and their own experience, what is it, right? What is the thing that like, and sometimes it's women, they say, wow, I don't know, there's just something about her I really like. Like I interviewed Connie Britton, right? This is an actress that almost, if you know who Connie Britton is, everyone has the same reaction. Oh my God, I love her, right?
Yeah.
And I think with Connie, it's about an empathy that she brings to each of, an empathy and wisdom that she brings to each of her characters. I interviewed Hannah Gadsby, the Australian comedian. You know, Hannah's a very challenging thing. And I think for her, it's like she's rejecting the way comedy was made. She's thought it was mean and that's not good. And so she's changing it. So it's trying to identify what those intangibles are.
That sounds wonderful. So going back to the election world for a moment, what are you thinking these days about our current election? How do you feel? As you fall over.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm in a, you know, I'm on this show called The Circus on Showtime. It's a weekly political documentary. And my colleagues on the show often tell me, Jennifer, that is post-traumatic stress and you're, you know, seeing problems that aren't here. Um, I, God, I choose to believe that we are on the cusp of, this is because I'm an optimist, but we're on the cusp of, I think a ton of people are going to vote, and I think that's great. I hope all of Donald Trump supporters turn out. I hope all of Joe Biden supporters turn out, and we see where we really are, right? I think that if that happens, Joe Biden will win. But what I hope is that, you know, we're really on a precipice here, and things could be very ugly after the election and even turn violent, or there could be a point where people say, I really want to start to understand the other side and start to break some of these divisions down. I travel a lot for the show, talk to a lot of, I'm obviously a Democrat and, you know, but I talk to a lot of Trump supporters, try to understand like, what is it that they see in Trump that I don't appreciate? What is it that they see where America's going that they want to change and see if there's any place to come together. You know, after 16, I was hoping that that's where we would be. I was hoping that we'd be a part, like where we had a reckoning, sort of resolved to agree to certain principles and move forward. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I am the endless optimist, and I do hope that that can happen now.
Yeah. Well, we're all watching. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah, it could last longer. Yeah, from what
It could last longer. Yeah. You know, if Biden has a big win on that election night, I think it could end quickly. If he doesn't, I think it will, you know, I think it will go on. I mean, it could it has the potential of being something like a presidential election like we have never seen before.
Mhm. I wanted to ask you about different generations, and you and I are the same. We're Generation X, and I know
Generation X, man, just like holding the place together as we always have done with no credit.
getting stuff done.
Just
Right,
getting stuff done.
getting stuff
Nobody
done.
cares about our trials and tribulations. We don't feel the need to share them. We're just getting stuff done.
Totally. I related to all of that so much in your book. How can we work with different generations? So I have teenagers. I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, both girls. And, you know, so I kind of, I see their world and I work with people of different generations, which is really interesting. I mean, I have to say having older and younger colleagues is really fascinating. Helps me a lot. How can women of different generations help each other?
Well, I think in Generation X, because we're so small, I think that we have always been bridges, right? I feel like, you know, I worked for a lot of baby boomers and then I work with a lot of millennials and Gen Z. And we've always had to, and women, I think, particularly good at this because we've always been very astute about how we can fit in and where we can be useful and being observant in that way. And there are, I try to be a good mentor to a lot of women, a lot of journalists, Shannon, as you can imagine, because a lot of the women journalists that, and it's great because I find they don't accept things that I accepted about how they were treated in the workplace. And one of them said to me, "What do you think the role of your generation is?" I said, "I think the role of Generation X is to be this bridge and say, not like with anger or resentment or an inability to hear all views, but to explain, like, this is why we've gotten to this place where women are treated the way they are. This is why you've internalized all these things, shed them." But to kind of explain and breathe that and be that bridge. And I said their job was to not expect to do worse than the men. I expected to do worse than men, right? I expected that, right? That's crazy. It's crazy in 2020. You should not expect to do worse than men. I said the job of millennial women, Gen Z, is not to expect to do worse than the men and call it out when it does happen. And I think that older women, if you have the standing in the workplace to be that as that supports, because sometimes the younger women aren't in a position to do that, and we need to do that for them. And so I've looked at it from going in the direction from the older to younger. I haven't looked at it from like what the responsibility of the younger generation to the older generation is, although I try to learn from them. I certainly listen a lot. And I think that, the millennials and Gen Z could, can help explain to us. But for older women, if you have the power, you got to use it to help the younger women, or they're going to end up in the same spot that we are. Can't do that. Oh my God. Break the cycle.
Break the cycle. Yeah. So I wonder if there's something about when you worked for President Obama, being his communications director, is there something you can tell, kind of something that would surprise us or surprised you about the way that works? I mean, most of us we see things from a different perspective from the outside. What surprised you from being on the inside there?
Oh, well, one thing I would say, because I worked for President Clinton and President Obama, is however chaotic, this is going to alarm everyone, but however chaotic it looks on the outside, it's always far worse on the inside. Because in the end, and the weird thing about working in a White House, particularly as I worked for President Clinton at a pretty young age, it gives you a confidence in the world, because what you realize is that there's really hard problems in the world. And even the president, I worked for Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, they're two brilliant men. They don't have all the answers either, right? And I think you think it's probably a very heady experience to be in the White House, and it fills you with confidence and bravado. And it's very humbling, because even with its talented and smart people as are around there, there's a really tough issues you deal with, and there are not easy answers, and you feel very inadequate and inept. And I think some of the staff may overcompensate for that with a bravado attitude, or overcompensate for that with being a little cynical, like, well, none of this actually matters, because they're frustrated by their inability to change things. But I think what people would be surprised by is just how really hard it is. Presidents are desperate for input. I mean, at least the two I worked for. And they don't think they have all the answers. And one thing I wrote about in my first book, Dear Madam President, with President Obama, is what I saw at every meeting. He would go around the room at the end and ask, if you hadn't said anything, he would ask you what you thought. And he wasn't just being nice, he was desperate for input. And usually the people who hadn't spoken were women, and people of color, particularly women of color. And they had the most insight, because they had told him something he hadn't heard from the white men in the room that had all came from the same schools and had the same jobs. And they got real insight from a different perspective. And that I think is good to know, at least about those two. And it gave me sort of confidence to know, if something hasn't been said, sometimes you don't want to speak up in a room if you have a different view. But what I learned from watching these two, it's really important that you do.
That's so interesting. I've seen that in meetings before, but to hear that the president had done that is really very interesting. And you see it now in Zoom meetings. You have all these faces up, and it's hard to get a word in, and you kind of talk over each other. And then it is good to say to the person who hasn't been able to say anything, what do you think?
Yeah.
That's great advice for many of us.
Yeah.
In a sense. How has the pandemic affected you, Jennifer? Is your work different? Yeah, I mean, how do you feel?
I had COVID very early
Okay.
on in March.
How are you doing?
Huh?
How are you doing now?
Fine now, but it is I was never very sick. I mean, I never had a really high fever. I was never in the hospital. But I definitely was sick for about 6 weeks. I found it very difficult to get over, and I found it moved around a lot. First 2 or 3 weeks was just like a flu, and then I had a hard time getting full breath. I had to go on an inhaler, and it took probably 2.5 months before you felt your normal stuff again. So it is, it's different for everybody, but it's no joke. And I had to launch a book in the middle of the pandemic, and you just see all these opportunities slipping away, and then just the fear of, that everyone had to face with facing that unknown. But it's been amazing to me how resourceful people are and resilient people are. With the book launch, it's like you just figure it out. You do Zoom books, we do this instead, and in some ways it allows you to do more. I do feel lucky that with the circus on Showtime that I do that show, I travel a lot, so I've been able to see how different communities are dealing with it. And America's remarkably resilient, but wow, it is, I very much see in real life the two different universes of what to believe and what not to believe that people live in. And yeah.
So you're traveling, seeing these different communities. So you're seeing and hearing still in person. That's great.
Yeah, we do. Also one of the best things about being on the show is you get a weekly COVID test. So
Oh. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's really good. And we have really safe protocols, and we've been doing this for 12 weeks, 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worked. But, like covering a presidential campaign in the middle of a pandemic is kind of mind blowing. I think, like, if anything, what occurs to me is we haven't, as disruptive as it's been, we haven't actually absorbed what a big deal it really was and is. I think, someone who likened it to World War II, like you had your life on December 6th, 1941.
Yeah.
And then you kept going, not realizing after December 7th that the whole world had changed. And I think that we haven't really processed how much it's changed.
I think you're right. And because you kind of react to what you need to react to, and we're still doing that in so many ways. And the election is part of it.
Go.
Yeah, the election is part of it. And the civil rights movement that is happening in our country is part of it. And the pandemic, and we're in it. And it's so hard to see history when we're in it, really.
Yeah.
What do you think about, you write in your book a little bit about how we need maybe a next wave of women's movement. Is that possible? Is that happening?
I think it's happening. Don't you think it's happening? I think it is happening. I think that
I feel like maybe like you had said before, we thought we were okay.
Yeah.
And so it's taken a little bit of rethinking to realize we're not.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that we thought, we were like, oh, well, like the laws have all been passed, as if that changes, hearts and minds. And I do think, I know not all women. There's plenty of women who support President Trump and did not have this experience that I did, but a lot of women in America did, which was, I think that the outcome of that election was sort of a tipping point where we thought, oh, I've been playing, wow, those doubts that I've had in my gut all along that maybe women are playing by the wrong set of rules. I think that outcome of that election, certainly for me and for millions of women, it just flipped a switch, because we thought, if, you know, Hillary did, I mean, the way I looked at it was like, she did everything she was supposed to do. She hit all of the marks. She was one of the most experienced people ever to run. And still we had this outcome. That's when you're like, okay, throw all the rules out the window. We're going to engage in the world differently. And I do think when I saw the millions and millions of women that turned out for that first women's march in 2017, I just was like, okay, we are not, things are changing and we're not going back. We are not, this is going to be sustained. And I've changed my life greatly since then, and the way I engage in the world. And you've seen millions of women do that. It's reflected in people who are running for office, people in the arts, people in reporting, Me Too, like all of these things. I think that we were sort of on a course for that kind of reckoning to happen, but this was a big accelerant. And I think there is a new women's movement. I mean, I just look at young women too, who are the most likely demographic in America to believe that men have it easier than women in America are millennial women. Yeah,
Interesting.
it's interesting to me. It is not baby boomers. It's not Gen X. It is the younger women in the workplace. They see it. And they're going to change it. So I think we are in the middle of, I guess this is the third wave. It's really like the fifth wave, but of feminism.
That's so interesting. Wow. So
Yeah,
we are getting some questions, which is fun. So anybody else who's out there, put your questions in. If you can, I think you're doing this in Crowdcast, and you can write your questions in for Jennifer, and I will start asking a few, but everyone kind of come in with your questions about any kind of thing right now. Let's see. Can you talk about intersectionality and how white women can use their privilege space at the table for others?
So, and I've written about this too, that what's interesting about the women's movement is it started with abolition. So the abolitionists in the early 19th century, the sort of women's rights movement was born out of that, because there was a sense that if women had the right to vote, they would vote to end slavery. And so these two forces, civil rights for Black Americans, suffrage rights for all women, were aligned for a long time, and then they splintered. And that was after the Civil War, or before the Civil War, but passing of the 15th Amendment, which gave suffrage to Black men. And ostensibly, although of course not really, because of Jim Crow laws. But there was a split, and there was a really great debate that Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony had in Albany at a civil rights convention around the time. I think this is like 1870, where Frederick Douglass, about whether or not women, whose right was more urgent, the white women or Black men. And Frederick Douglass said, when women, because they are women, are taken out of their homes and hung from trees, when women, because they are women, have their heads beaten into the sidewalk, then her need will be as urgent as mine. But until then, mine is more urgent. And it was remarkable to read this, and I'm paraphrasing him, but it was remarkable to read this because that's true today, right? Those words can be said today about how Black men are treated in America. And I think, what I've encouraged white women to realize is that even if in your own life, you're not, you don't feel responsible for what came before you, have to appreciate that legacy, that it was a white woman who falsely accused a man in Tulsa of raping her that led to the Tulsa massacre, that it was a white woman that falsely accused Emmett Till of harassing her that led to his murder. And the long line of white women that we are a part of, but also that, and this is certainly true for me, that while I didn't feel satisfied in my sort of perch in the white male patriarchy, right? It was sort of a refuge and a shelter for me. And that, I think white women can be like, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to I don't have it great, but I kind of have it okay. I want things to be sort of settled. I want things to be okay. And so we're not pushing for other marginalized populations, and we're not even pushing for ourselves as much as we have because we don't want to risk the little perch we have. And what white women need to understand is when you're not willing to risk your perch, you are perpetuating these systems that keep people of color from having the like justice and rights and opportunities that they deserve. You also are hurting yourselves. So no, our need, white women's need for equality in the world is not as great as people of color. It's not, but we deserve it too, right? And the same power systems that block people of color from having power, the same power systems that block you from having power. So be a good ally.
You wonder how these movements can help each other.
Yeah, I mean, they can. I've definitely seen how when they're pitted against each other, right? That's fighting for scraps. That's what keeps white male patriarchal systems in power. But when you support each other, that is when real change happens. And I think that's what this reckoning is all about, right? That the country was founded on this great principle: everyone's created equal if you're white, a man, and have land, right? And then we had slavery, and we had genocide in the form of how indigenous people were treated, and women were excluded from rights from the start. And that bill has come due. And my hope is, and it's not for certain, but my hope is that it's early enough that we can still repair these injustices. We could repair this injustices so that you can build new power systems, vitalize democracy, or maybe, but I also accept that it may be too late. It may have been too much justice and opportunity denied for too long. So.
Well, we have another question from someone who's a fan of Dear Madam President, loved your first book. You talk about being a fire starter at work. So how can one be a fire starter without burning down the entire house?
Women know how to calibrate this. We do. I just don't accept that we don't know how to calibrate it. We do. We calibrate everything. And err on the side of being a fire starter. I mean, err on the side of you have to err on the side of being a problem. And if all women do it, I mean, there's just so much safety in numbers. There is sociological research that shows there's safety in numbers, and there's just also what we know to be true in our own life. And so you have to back women up. We would certainly do this in the Obama White House. We would echo each other. Cecilia Munoz would say something in a meeting, and I'd be like, "Hey, great point Cecilia just had." Bro, who just repeated Cecilia's point back, and everybody thought was really smart, but nobody acknowledged that it was Cecilia's idea from the start. Even when I didn't agree with my female colleagues, I would be like, "Kathy had a great point over there. Thank you, Kathy, for your great point." Because we have to lift each other's voices up, because men and women's minds are programmed to hear men over women. It doesn't mean we're all sexist. It means we all have those inherent biases. And so you have to be a sister, support each other, and speak up. And I do, this may sound naive, but it has worked in my own life, which is to assume good intentions on everyone's part. That may be giving some people in the room, that may be giving some men in the room too much credit. But if you act as if, again, going back to Evelyn Lieberman's advice, if you act as if you belong there, people sort of accept it. And this is another piece of advice that Valerie Jarrett gave me, which was, don't wait to be given permission. Don't ask for permission. Just take ownership of a problem, and people, including the men, will be glad that you did. And so I think that we get a lot of blowback, but I think sometimes we fear it more than we're going to actually experience it. And again, what's the alternative? The alternative we can't accept the status quo. So push it.
So we have a follow-up question to what we talked about with the pandemic. So the pandemic has put so many women out of work. So there's a greater risk of authenticity and asserting yourself. Is this the right time when many women simply need to hang on to what they have?
I mean, I understand that I am in a position where I can push the envelope more, so I do. If you're not in the position to, I hear that, and my gut tells me that's wrong. My gut tells me it's wrong to wait. My gut tells me that it's when you have big problems that you can really change the world. But each individual woman is in a different situation. If you're in the situation where you can push it, and where you can push it on behalf of other women, other marginalized people, do it. But I really believe that women assume there's going to be more opposition and pushback that we can't handle than there actually is, either because the pushback's not as much as we thought, or we can handle it. But you gotta foresee the issue, because we're in a real, it's dangerous. We could really slide back here.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a question. What do you think we should do as women to further the feminist movement in terms of law revising and more representation in the government and other workplaces that are predominantly men?
Yeah, run for office. I mean, women are running for office in historic numbers, and they're winning historic numbers. Women used to think that they had to have a certain resume to run. They don't think that anymore. There's this whole notion of as is. I'm going to run as is. Women said that organically. It resulted in huge numbers of women being elected in 2017 and 18. When women run for office, they win. They have a better average than men. I think maybe they work a little harder, take it a little more seriously. That is how. We don't need a law to change it in government. We need women to do this. I do think that passing the ERA would help, in part because the discussion that the ratification process would spur, I think, really would open people's minds to all the gender biases that we do inhibit men and women, that we do hold men and women both. And I think even just that conversation would help. In politics, on the Democratic side, sometimes we find that more voters, more people of color turn out when there is something else at stake, like a vote, something on the ballot that's related to voting or power, and that turns more people out. It just sort of tells me how important these debates are, that how they can affect people's minds. So I think that the ERA, just to go through that process, would be, and in addition to having these rights enshrined in the Constitution, would be helpful.
How realistic is that? I mean, my teenage daughters, when they study that, they say, "How is it that we did not pass that? How
Yeah.
did that not happen?" And
Women
when you
turn
find
on each
yourself
other.
explaining it, yeah,
Women turn on each other. There were times when women almost got suffrage in the 19th century, and a group of women organized to stop it. And when women are pitted against each other, we lose. So the ERA is the classic example and warning of that, because it looked like a sure thing. It was definitely going to happen, and there was no way it could be stopped. And women organized to stop it, and they were successful at that. When there's nothing more there's no more powerful weapon to use against a woman than another woman. It really undermines her credibility. And that's what happened there. It almost happened with the 19th Amendment, when suffrage was enacted in 1920. It came down to Tennessee, and the day of the vote, the anti-suffragists thought they were going to win, and one man, Henry Byrne, his mom, Feb Byrne, had written him a letter, and he was a state legislator. Everyone thought he was going to vote anti. He was even wearing the anti-flower, and his mom wrote him a letter and said, you need to give women this right. And he did, and that's why the 19th Amendment was passed. But Tennessee was like basically the last hope. It almost didn't happen. And then that is what happened with the ERA. Women didn't support each other, and it didn't happen. And I am seeing there is sort of organically this happening. Some states are passing it again, just going out of their way to re-ratify it if they, even though they did it before. So I think it could happen again. It may seem like a small thing, but it would spur all of these other discussions. It would spur, Shannon, would spur discussions about childcare. And, it's a free thing, right? As opposed to some of these other changes we would like to see enacted that cost money. And I just think it could spur a lot.
Is that something you're working on right now, or are you?
It's not, but it sounds like I should, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was like, well, maybe this is like a 2021 thing. I don't know. But I really, the power of our own voice and what we argue for that in of itself changes the world, matters.
Interesting. So there's a question about the Lincoln Project, specifically the Vote for Her ad. Can you talk about that?
Oh, this is a really good ad. It is, so it's like images of women, uh, and, in the face of, Trump as president and how he treats women, that like to be I think it's targeted to men to be a better ally and support women by not reelecting him. We did something very similar with Hillary. I think it was called Mirrors, and it was like Trump's voice playing over, and like young women, girls, even older women, like looking in the mirror as he's saying these things about women. The Lincoln Project, I think, is really good at getting under Trump's skin. They are really effective, I think, in Senate races. They're doing a lot of stuff in Senate races too that I think is helpful. Um, they know how to speak to Republicans, and I think that's what they're trying to do there. Like men and women that are on the verge, are uncomfortable with Trump.
Imagine a young girl looking in
over.
So you think it's working, or
I mean, it's I think that I don't know if it's, like I can't know if it's working, but it seems it's a powerful ad. I
Mhm.
think the project in of itself is useful partly for the baiting of Trump and getting under his skin and provoking him. But I also have just seen in my own life, it's really hard to move Trump supporters off from supporting him. They get something very valuable, real purpose from his presidency, very deep belief in him, and that, the stories you tell about America matter. And he tells a story about America that makes sense to a lot of people. Sure, a lot of people in Wisconsin felt the same way. A lot of people in Kenosha felt the same way.
So what would you say to the women my daughter's ages, 17 and 14, these young women who can't vote yet? They're watching all of this go on, and they're kind of, like many people, amazed and
Yeah.
made and think I will get to vote someday. What would you tell these young women to think about and watch and do?
That when we don't all engage in the democracy, when we think it's somebody else's problem, this is what happens. And what this should show their generation is there are tools to make this democracy actually represent everyone and really work. And it is on everyone to utilize them, or else this is not President Obama says that these rules are self-evident, but they are not self-executing.
Mhm.
And I hope that they look at that and think, oh, I can use my voice. You see that with the protests and for the summer after George Floyd's killing, and how much that mattered. You see it in the way women express themselves in women's marches and running for office. And I hope they look at that and see, that kind of awakening is the beginning of their life. Their lesson is I build from there, not we go back to the way things were before.
Mhm, mhm. And how do you see the democracy today? I just was wrapping up a public radio program this weekend on that, so I've been talking about democracy with a lot of people. And this is you just mentioned democracy. I mean, do you think democracy is at stake right now?
Yeah, definitely is. The show that we did this week for the circus for Showtime that will air on Sunday night. It is about this. I mean, it's about Trump saying that it's going to be a rigged election, and all of the steps that are being taken to make it hard for people to vote. And you know, it's voter suppression in a different form, and the things that Republicans will be prepared to do on the back end if they don't win. What are the safety nets that that Joe Biden has if he wants to continue to fight after the election? This is not a drill. You know, this is truly democracy on the ballot. And, you know, from my perspective, we have a president who does not follow the rule of law. And, you know, you see how when you put the democracy in the hands of somebody who doesn't follow the principles of the Constitution, the democracy is pretty fragile. So I do think that is that's what's at stake. If he wins again, I'm very concerned that the damage that's done to the democratic norms may be irreparable.
What a time.
I know. And again, we're just too close to it to be able to appreciate all of it, but it's something it certainly is interesting times to live through. I hope people see it as something that they are participating in, not something they're watching.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, thank you.
Yeah, going that way.
Yeah, participating, voting, being involved.
Yeah, and like in your own life too. You know, it's good to show up and protest if you're worried about racial injustice, and it's good to vote. But you know, are you a good ally in your workplace to people of color if you're a white person? You know, do you support the women in your lives? Do you support the women in your workplace? Like, there are things that we can, and I just really believe in the power of women to change the world. You just change the way you engage in the world, and you have in fact changed the world.
That's great. Jennifer, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. I love talking with you. Your book is fascinating. Everyone should go get it. She Proclaims, and also listen to your podcast. And yeah, it's so fascinating. So Connor, I don't know if you're coming back to say, there you are.
I am,
yeah.
Here I am. Yes, I am coming back. I just want to say thank you to both of you. This was just such a great hour. I think we probably could have done a whole nother one. But yes, please watch The Circus on Sunday night, but also please listen to the Best of Our Knowledge. The most recent episode of To the Best of Our Knowledge is all about elections.
Democracy on the ballot.
Democracy on the
ballot.
There you go.
True. Check.
Great. And if you are interested in these types of events or types of conversations, I highly encourage you to go back to the Wisconsin Book Festival Crowdcast and watch our previous events with people like Carol Anderson for her book One Person No Vote, or Katie Hill for She Will Rise. We definitely have conversations like this often, mainly because the audience likes them and they're very important. So we hope that you will stay with us. We have 6 more events coming up. In a half an hour, we'll be joined by Layla Lalami for her book Conditional Citizens, all about immigrating here from Morocco and what it means to be an American. So more great conversations coming up all day long. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Shannon, as always, thank you for being here. And we will see you all at another event sometime soon, we hope. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye.